All right, let's talk about death data. This is Florida Department of Health data. It is a combination of the differences in data added every day, so reported data, and deaths by day as graphed by the Florida Department of Health. They don't provide individual dates for individual case deaths, so people dying on a specific day individually are not reported. That doesn't exist. There is, however, a feature layer that is provided by the Florida Department of Health on their ArcGIS S3 website, which is called Deaths by Day. In that Deaths by Day data, you can find aggregate counts for every single death that occurred or was certified, I guess, on a given day. So that gives us essentially a count of people who happen to have died on that day, or their body had been recovered on that day. So if you just search for that, 1 = 1 just gives us every result. Star in the outfield gives us every field, and we can order by date, descending. That way we'll get the most recent data, and it'll be helpful to see what we get. So as you can see, we get a 9 for deaths that occurred on July 10th. Now, if we look at the actual data released on July 10th, which is PDF reports from the Florida Department of Health. So if we take July 10th, so deaths occurring on July 10th are reported on the next day. Well, generally they are. And it's helpful because it allows us to see, let me find the deaths. There's new deaths, or change in deaths since previous reports. So this does not tell us that there were deaths that occurred on July 10th. All it tells us is there's 95 more deaths total cumulative in Florida since the beginning of the outbreak. There's 4,197 total. The day before, there were, actually we can check. The day before we had, just want to make clear that these are the numbers reported. Again, I'm not talking about actual deaths occurring. So 4,102 residents, right? So the problem is Florida's only counting changes in residents. They're now finally highlighting a little bit more easily the non-Florida residents. The best way to get a total of reported deaths is to use what's called the case line data. So if you go to the case line data, which is again sourced and used in the dashboard that you've probably experienced, this dashboard is the famous Rebecca Jones dashboard that was now taken over since she's been fired. And it gives us new cases by residents by day. And then it does show us a graph here that is highly misleading. And here's why it's highly misleading. While there are a ton of data from this dashboard that are pulled, actually, you can see it. So literally click here to access and download the data. This link over here takes you to an open FDOH ArcGIS hub. This is the same data, case line data. And then right here, you can see case line data. It's the exact same. Like if you could copy the ID right there. There you go. Let me open it so we can be super clear that this is the same stuff. Click on that. Florida case line data, updated on the 11th. The data is here. It's a feature layer, and the feature layer has these fields, and it contains, actually this is not the right one. This is not case line data as far as I know. There we go. Case line data has these attributes, right? This is cases by county. I accidentally clicked on that. It's related data. So anyway, these are the fields that are there. Very important in the fields that you see there. There is no date of death. All there is a died column, and that column has two possible values. Not available, NA, or yes. There's a very few yeses. There's 4,301 yeses. Now keep that in mind, 4,301 yeses, which is something I personally tally on a report that I make that pulls the same data from individual cases. That is higher than today's report on the 11th for the 10th that includes 4,197 plus 104, right? If you add the two numbers together, 4,301. Again, going back here, 4,301. I hope we're all in agreement. This is the number of added deaths. This is not, or reported deaths. This is not the number of people who died yesterday. That's not how that works. There's a lot of lag. There's a lot of delays. Medical examiners have to do their thing, coding, etc. And also health services are under pressure. So there's a lot of delays that occur. It's normal. Now, this is why this graph is misleading. This graph is different. It's not giving us a delta or a difference between today's total raw count of cases added, or sorry, of cases total minus yesterday's cases total ever reported, or deaths total ever reported. But that's still very interesting. It doesn't mean you can't derive necessarily that yesterday a bunch of people died. There are a bunch of people who died over the past few days and potentially weeks, because there are effects, delay effects essentially, and in clusters of people get added at one time. So now if we look at just this same data that I just showed you, I have been tracking, and my colleagues at the COVID tracking projects have been tracking for months. So since early March, I think, early March, we have not been given access to deaths by day. I think at the time, this is more of a recent development. And we don't have the actual individual dates of deaths for the people who eventually die. So we can't really reverse engineer exactly how many people died on these dates until we get this data that I just showed you, which is the death by date, right? So let's take a date. I don't know. We knew of, let's see what these fields are. Deaths right now. Total deaths known on March. Let's take the first 10 deaths. So March 20th. So if I say where date is less than, I think it's date 2020 03, let's see, 21. I think that's how you do dates. I might have to look that up. That does not work. That might actually work like this. There we go. Perfect. Getting lucky with this. So on the 20th, there were 2 deaths, at least recorded in the aggregated. It's been a while now, so it's probably reliable. And as I can show you, if I actually scroll back to the actual deaths that the graph of deaths that I keep, which is both reported deaths on a given date. So the 20th, 2 deaths reported, 2 deaths occurred. The total tally, however, at that point was the count as 16. So this number that you see here is showing us what we knew to be the tally of cases added compared to the prior day on that day. So to clarify this as much as I can, because it can be confusing, there were 8 deaths the day before, 10 total deaths reported on that date. Therefore, we tabulated there were 2 added deaths. Not that they died on that day, not that 2 people died on March 20th. That's not what we calculated. It happened to be true, but that's not necessarily the case. There are many days where fewer people than were added died on the specific day that the people were added, etc. It can be confusing. So let's get back to this. So this delta, this is what this means, of total deaths from one day to the next, and I hope I didn't screw that up, gives us an interesting thing to look at, because this is, by the way, this is the red line here is reported deaths. I should probably switch those colors over because it's not clear, but the finality of, the darkness of death is the black color. So based on the graph or actually a longer version of this graph, which is truncated to early June, this data that you see in gray here is the same data that you see right here. It's this Florida COVID-19 deaths by day. And so once again, if I just go back to just showing all of the results, starting from the most recent, we have 9 deaths on the 10th. If I go back to the graph, on the 10th, actually I need to extend that because we have one more day of data. There you go. So we have 98 added deaths on that day. And as you can see here, now I'm going to export I made a little script that it essentially does deaths by day, and this is what it does. It grabs the same service URL, it calculates the first date and the last date, iterates through every single day since then to create a time series data. It's open source. You can find it on GitHub. It's located at github.com/this/Ovid, and it's Ruby, so it's fairly easy to digest. You can check my code. It's possible that I may have made mistakes. This is, however, very little code, and if there's a mistake, I think the simplest thing that I can explain is I iterate through literally every single field in the data following the date of that day. So I start at the earliest day and map out for every single day, even days where there were no reports. How many deaths were reported on that day? And I used the matching record attribute deaths. And so it's a number, and I just print that number, and this is what I get as a result. So I run Ruby deaths by day, not the funnest thing you could be running, and it exports in my exports folder. Let's just grab that by day, deaths by, there you go. So it gives me the 11th, this is this. So it gives me this file. Nope, that doesn't work. It's an export, that's why. There you go. So it gives me this file. As you can see, on the 10th, there is 9. So just verifying that. But just to be super, super safe, I'm going to open my exports folder, and I'm going to take that data, put it straight in the spreadsheet, and replace every single item I have. So see, it starts on the 5th of the date. That date, however, is not the reported date. So there's some shenanigans happening here that I often have to account for the fact that Florida Department of Health reports on a day about the previous day. So deaths. All right, I'm going to update the entire column. So we should see some movement because every single day there's just some readjustments. For instance, there's a bunch of deaths that weren't reported, as you can see in the black bars there. This is where you're going to see move. There you go. Do you see that? I'll do it again. I'm pasting the data, and we can scroll down if it's easier for you to see. There's a bunch of days here where you see numbers like 47, 51, 41, 37. When I paste, these numbers change. That is exactly what we would expect if there were backlogged data, and that's exactly what's happening. There's backlogged data. So the graph that looks like it might be trending downward, this graph over here, well, now that we're past that date, past that limit of, say, today or yesterday or the day before, we realize, oh, wait, there's actually a sobering upward trend, not a downward trend. And I'm making this video in response to a lot of kind of like misinterpreting of the data, where I think potentially people have used the case line data event date. That event date, however terribly named by the Florida Department of Health, does not represent when someone died. It represents when someone either, and this is really, really confusing, developed symptoms, so onset of symptoms, as reported by, I'm not sure, might be reported by a physician, a laboratory specialist, a hospital admissions nurse, not sure. That's a terrible, terrible metric, which would be separate completely from this next alternative meaning of the event date, which is when they receive the first positive lab result, giving them a COVID-19 positive diagnosis. So that's terrible that these two numbers are munched together. And I can show you this in the case line data. This is the case line data. And of course, my computer crashed as I was trying to show you the case line data. So in the case line data, you have for every single positive person tested in Florida, the county of residence, I believe, the age of the person, the age group of the person, gender of the person, whether they're a Florida resident, non-Florida resident, or, gets even better, diagnosed and isolated in, not diagnosed and isolated in Florida, but happens to be a Florida resident, so they come from somewhere else. That number has not changed in generations by now. I don't know what it would take to make that number change. The origin of the person, hey, look there, there's a French person. No, actually, this is not the origins of the person. Highly confusing. This is the travel origin of the person. So if you see a travel-related case, often there's going to be a travel origin. So they went on vacation to France, and because they're a Florida resident, they're not a French person. They were noted as having traveled from France and might be useful. They did not visit the emergency department. This is not the ER. This is ED. Could be the emergency. Well, it could be the ER, but it's specifically the emergency department visit. So, did they visit the emergency? No. Were they hospitalized? No. Have they died? Not yet. Hopefully, they won't. Are they a case? I mean, this is new. Actually, I've never seen that one. Of course, they're a case. What is that? That was a dumb thing. Anyway, let's go back here. I don't. Some of this data just makes no sense. Died. All right, cool. So died. Here are the possible values. I think I've already mentioned this, but I'll just repeat. Not available. Those are dead. When people die, they are not given a date of death in this case line data. The only thing that happens is that they are now listed as dead. Died, yes. It's a weird value. It's the only value in that field. I don't know if you can see. No uppercase, yes uppercase, yes uppercase. If you get to case and you get to contact and you get to died, somehow now it's like upper lowercase. It's great. Unknown contact is whether or not they contacted another, or it's known that they were in contact with another COVID lab confirmed, I think, or antigen. So PCR or an antigen maybe now. Now, dates. Let's talk about timestamps. Case underscore, event date, and chart date. Chart date and event date are the same thing. What they mean by chart date is this stuff. They get charted over here as new cases. What's weird to me is because they exclude non-residents for a completely spurious reason, because the CDC does recommend they not report residents from other states. It's still relevant to everyone involved, and we've made a case for that in a recent blog post on the COVID tracking blog with Rebecca Glassman, my co-writer, specifically recommending these. It's very long, sorry. These recommendations, which is residents and non-residents should be included because people in Florida are often tourists, and it's very important that data not be just resident only. It can be very confusing for people and reporters as well. Let's get back to the case line. Okay, so this is the part that I mentioned earlier where the event date here is different than the case date. So for instance, the event date here is for this person, let's take the person who came from France, somehow on June 21st, 8 p.m. is probably simply the date the data was added, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, on June 21st, either this person developed symptoms and that was noted somehow, or they received a positive lab result. What's interesting about the event date specifically is the data definition for the event date. I'm not just saying this, you can look this up also. If you go back to this gallery, there's a data definition. It was recently updated. There you go. It's a PDF. You can open it, and when you open it, you can search. Thankfully, it's text, and you can ask event date. What is that? Date symptoms started. I'm going to zoom in so you can see better. Date symptoms started, or if that date is unknown, date lab results were reported to DOH. So this is two dates into one. I wish there were two dates. I wish there was an onset date and not an event date, which is completely meaningless, but a lab positive date or lab result date. That would be easier. And although I wish there was a date of death or date died or something, I don't think, based on the amount of information that's available with the county, the age, the gender, the jurisdiction, the travel itinerary, I think it would be possible for someone to figure out who those cases are, and that would be a violation of HIPAA and privacy laws. So it's understandable due to that the only data that is reported then is this data on deaths by day. I think that's it. I'm trying to keep this short, but it's confusing to a lot of people. And so here's an example of a post that I think gets the data wrong. not trying to single out this person, but Josh Friedlander over here on Twitter made a graph recently, I think today, showing deaths by date. Note, very importantly, that I think he was trying to not be alarmist and calm people down and say, hey, wait, hold on a minute. Like, there's not that many deaths by date recently. Well, the problem is, if you look at that bar right there, that's 50 death by date, right? So according to this graph, whose source I ignore, which does not have clear labels, which does not have clear dates, and isn't precisely showing its sourcing, like what field is it using to source, like what actual data set. I've provided the data set. You can reproduce my data. There's not a single day since sometime between May and June that crosses the 50 per day threshold of deaths. Okay. Let's go to the deaths by date. This is the thing right there. And I'm just going to take date greater than 2020-05. And what was the date on this thing? 2020-05-5. Let's do 2020-05-5. It's roughly this area. So there's nothing crossing 60 right here. So let's do that. 2020-05. And we're just going to get all of them. And look for anything that, there you go. July 7th, 66. July 6th, 56. I'll bring this over here so you can see it better. July 7th is right there. We don't have anything crossing 30 here. I don't know what this data is, but it is not deaths by day. That's it. I would love to know what it is. Please be careful reporting about deaths. It's a very complicated topic. Once again, what we knew yesterday was this. What we know today is this. Once again. And the trend, again, I'll change it. I'll take this table, I'll put a linear trend instead of a 7-day moving average. Unmistakably, yes, it takes a while for the actual deaths to be recorded on their given day, but the trends, as you can see, are going upward in a linear fashion, at least for now. And they are close to one another. They're not in complete dysynchrony. Don't even know if that's a word. That's it. And now I think much more importantly than a linear trend, which is kind of smoothing out pretty much everything, a 7-day moving average is nowadays the most common way to smooth out inconsistencies in data reporting. So as you can see, rarely is the the tally of reports by day that wildly different from the deaths by day. That's understandable. While there is a lag, there shouldn't be that much of a lag that a clump of people are delayed. This is here happening. So at the beginning of May, around Memorial Day, huge amounts of deaths were added, but they were for previous days, probably, because you don't see a spike in deaths here. So yes, at that time, you could have argued that maybe it's not as bad as it seems. You could have. We wouldn't have known that because whether or not there were fewer or more deaths wouldn't have been known until several days, probably a week, maybe 2 weeks after. Now, for the last 2 days, 7/9, 7/10. For the last 2 days, let me make sure that I've graphed everything. Actually, no, I'm missing the last day. Let me add the last day. That's going to be a great way to finish this video, which is already too long. All right. Add the last day. Not quite as bad. Please look at this and understand that, one, we've never had that many added deaths 3 days in a row, ever, on this graph, ever. This is not meaningless. Volume of deaths added is a metric. It's not a metric of exactly when those people died, but it's definitely a metric that people are dying, and people dying, not great. Now, like I mentioned 15 times already, yes, the trend of deaths by day plummets down the last 3 days because there is no data reported for that yet. It's missing. It's just we have 6 cases, 9 cases in there. So yeah, but based on the trend, which please look at this trend, which is accelerating and on a trajectory that is steeper than pretty much any time since end of March, when we had quarantine orders, stay-at-home orders, mask mandates in Florida, the fact that leadership in Florida and healthcare professionals in Florida aren't as alarmed as they were back then is interesting. That's all I'll say about that. Thank you.